Welcome. I'm Kamil Sarji, your host, and this is Just 2 Minutes. I have George here.
Good morning, everybody. George Lough from Russo and Lough PC in Warwick, Rhode Island, and North Smithfield, Rhode Island. Satellite office in Raynham, Massachusetts.
Awesome. This is another episode of Just 2 Minutes. It's basically me asking just random questions for the first 2 minutes, and then we'll go into the topic, which is landlord-tenant drama.
A lot of drama.
Right word.
And landlord-tenant.
All right, cool. Let's get started. Here's the timer. And all right. Do you listen to country music?
I listen to all types of music. Every now and again, I listen to country music as well.
Sure. If you were to pick one of those country singers, these three, which one would you pick? Selena Dion, Beyonce, or Dolly Parton?
I guess I'm probably thinking a little bit more old school and go with Dolly Parton.
Okay. So,
although I like Beyonce's new songs.
Yeah, I didn't hear it. I don't listen to country music.
It's all over the radio on all the channels.
I know. We can't get away. Go into a store and it's like it's playing. If you were to occupation, right? If you were to work in a moving company or a machinist at a manufacturing plant, which one would you pick?
I think I would probably pick a moving company because it involves a great deal of human interaction and involves helping people make major transitions in their life. So I think I would find that pretty interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, it's and a lot of exercise, which is awesome.
Always a good thing.
Free exercise. All right. So what's the weirdest thing that you've eaten and why?
That's a tough one. I really am kind of a foodie, so I try to eat all types of food. I think, however, I get disappointed at chains. So I would say that it's probably been a good 5 years since I've eaten at like a Denny's. And I really think I'm disappointed.
That's the weirdest?
It is, because we're so blessed with like a coffee and cream over here in North Smithfield.
I was thinking like
liver island.
I was thinking liver, cow tongue, things like that.
Tripe. I'm not a huge tripe fan. I like liver. Liver's a very good organ meat, very rich in nutrients.
Why would you eat that?
Iron. Why would I eat it? Because I thought that I could make it less bitter this time.
All right.
I was unsuccessful in making it less bitter.
All right. What'd you think of that?
Pretty cool. I'm probably the most boring person alive. I probably am.
No, you'd be a moving company. That's pretty cool.
I think we'd run one.
Yeah, I think I would be a moving company too.
Yeah, because we give us human interaction. That would just open doors. If I'm in a machine, if I'm making widgets all day long, I'm going to make widgets for the rest of my life. I'm in a moving company, and so we're going to see
super strong, and you see a lot of cool things walk around. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I agree with you.
Sooner or later, we're owning a moving company. Developing it and helping people in the community, put one piece together.
Today's topic is landlords and tenants. So as far as a landlord, when someone buys a new house, everybody has this vision of, I'm going to buy a multifamily and I'm going to generational wealth and this is going to be awesome. This is the best. Have you dealt with new landlords dealing with drama?
All the time. And a lot of times with you. A lot of times with you. I think one of the great things about when you and I work on projects together is before somebody becomes a new landlord, you and I take time to educate them on the process. We make sure that we have atonement letters. We make sure we understand what the previous relationship was between the parties. We try to make sure that the property is up to code and in compliance with the new lead paint law requirements, health and safety, before our clients take over the property. And then we're able to kind of, wherever it's possible, I like to have the prospective landlord meet the existing tenant prior to the closing so they can get a sense of one another, because turnover is a difficult and expensive thing in this process. And if you have a good tenant that's coming into the property and they're paying a reasonable rate for rent, it often makes time to continue that relationship. On the other hand, if there are contrasting views as to where things are going, it's better to get that at the beginning of the relationship so that the new landlord and the tenant can transition their relationship relationships to other opportunities.
Sometimes I see where they get the home and they think that they're going to come in and receive money, but it's a full-time job. It's rare to get a good tenant, but the problem is some of the tenants have to deal with a bad landlord who's not fixing the
Absolutely.
leak. And like, I hear this all the time. Like, landlords are not doing what they're supposed to do for these tenants to rent these homes.
I think that, it gets to education. I think that there's a lot of websites and other platforms out there that suggest that being a landlord might be an easier task than it is. I think that people really need to educate themselves, talk to other existing landlords, and recognize that it's a symbiotic relationship between the landlord and the tenant. You're in this together. And if you take a collaborative approach, you'll have less sour grapes along the way. You'll actually create a better and more effective relationship. The landlord's got a duty to maintain and inspect, keep that property up. They're seeking market rent, which right now is substantially more than it was even just a few years ago. There's an expectation on behalf of the tenant, and a reasonable expectation on behalf of the tenant, that the landlord is going to ensure that the property is up to snuff, and a good attorney is going to tell people that. They're not going to shy away from that, and they're not going to undermine the responsibilities. It's really a symbiotic relationship. You'll get good rent if you provide good service, just like in any other business. And if you fall short, there'll be consequences, just like there is in any other business.
But the problem is some landlords, they think, oh, I'm going to be nice and cool with my tenant. We're going to be friends. We're going to hang out, go in the backyard and barbecue. You can't do that with a tenant. You got to be professional and not have from my experience, not have a relationship with the tenant.
I think you need to keep the relationship professional.
Mm-hmm.
I think muddying the waters where you can create a lack of clarity, and that can create different expectations, and that can become a problem if there's a breakdown in communications. So while you might invite your tenant to a Sunday barbecue or cookout in August, I don't necessarily think that it's a great idea to have the tenant make repairs and offset them. I think that turned into a disaster time and time again. I think that the tenant should have an expectation of a clean, good housing stock available to them in compliance with the law. And I think the landlord should be able to expect that rent to be paid on the first of the month without delay. And, any deviation from those expectations is where there are problems. You're right. And it should be kept professional at all times.
And I think that the landlord, it's really tough. Like, it's super stressful for these. I mean, if they're not doing the work, obviously they're really stressed. They're trying to be cheap and giggling in the background. But I think if there's a way to find these landlords who are stressed, just, hand it over to me. I'll help you sell it.
Absolutely. I
and
think that
get out of that situation. It's better for the tenants. Like, they're going to live happier and,
it's better for everybody, because there are, the substantive changes, the lead paint law, and there's a discussion about it, maybe delaying the implementation a little bit. But, due to the tragic poisoning of many of our youth for many, many years, the General Assembly has radically overridden the laws in Rhode Island as to lead, and they are going to substantially change the state of the law right now. And it's going to take landlords who maybe haven't done anything in decades with their real estate, they're going to have to make changes to comply with the statute. And if they're not ready to make those changes, it might make sense for them to transition out of that real estate to someone who might be more inclined to do that work.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, Kamil, you will find the right people to do that, and we'll make sure that those items are properly negotiated and there's concession if the property is not in compliance with those new standards.
Yeah, I think again, it would be great for the tenants to have a landlord who actually does what they're supposed to, and for a landlord to have a tenant that does what they're supposed to, which is like pay on time every month. Have you ever ran into an issue where, because you represent the landlords, right?
Primarily.
Have you had a situation where got abusive? Like, they got in a fight?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly. Again, it gets to your point about being professional, but if everybody kind of follows the rules and the regulations and the statutes, there's no reason for things to get confrontational.
How about stab? Has anybody stabbed?
In fact, it was a subsidized housing property many years ago, but yes, I have, yes. And that's what happens when proper things aren't followed. Yeah.
Who stabbed who?
He was a tenant that stabbed another tenant.
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay. So the landlord didn't get stabbed.
The landlord didn't get stabbed in that incident.
And it's
just as bad.
I've dealt with that. It's crazy. It's like kids. Like, guys, don't fight. This is your space. This their space.
Violence of any nature is never the answer. It's just going to escalate the situation to a worse place, if that's possible to imagine. So that's why following the statutes, following the guidelines, being reasonable, and saying, is this an objectively reasonable approach that I'm taking, is probably the best course of action to take.
Any other crazy drama that
Do we want to make this web podcast an hour or 10 days? I think essentially, that we've seen stories, and we do this work in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, and they're two different, statutory and adjudicative systems. But, it comes back to communication. It comes back to communication and expectations before the landlord even buys the property, where you deal with the smaller one. Institutional landlords, they just do this as a matter of course. But, your smaller landlord, somebody buying a multifamily property, they would do well to understand the culture and the nature, what they're dealing with before they even get into the property, get an understanding of the rent roll, the lack thereof, what records there are, and really kind of have the property inspected by a home inspector who knows the statute and knows where the issues are. Take a look at code enforcement. Take a look at what if there's been previous judicial actions involving the tenants that are in the property. Really dial down, because this is going to be your concern when you own the property.
Mm-hmm.
So as much knowledge as you can have going into it, the better. And again, keeping it professional, knowing what your expectations are under the law, and it puts you in a position where if you have a disagreement or a falling out, that you're able to advocate for your position with the least amount of blowback.
How about security deposits? I know when it's transferred over from the old owner to the new, I've seen so many times where the tenant says, oh, I gave him a security deposit that was more than the rent.
I usually make the seller sign an affidavit on the
Mhm.
pains and penalties of perjury. So
Yeah.
therefore, if there's a dispute, I mean, there's always the possibility of that happening, but it makes it a little bit more challenging to make that assertion. And when you have that affidavit, it's one more that we do in addition to the estoppel.
Because it's like after you buy the place, you go in and you're like, hey, tenants, I'm your new landlord. And then they're like, oh, yeah, by the way, my security deposit was this much. And you're like, it's not what the landlord said.
And, there's two other ways to approach that. One, there's the form that you and I have used 100 times at real estate closings that says you have a duty to cooperate afterwards. And secondly, if there's any dispute at all whatsoever, you and I have the document we've put together that has the landlord and the tenant sign off. So again, when the potential buyer is doing their due diligence, if, the tenant, doesn't allow access to the apartment, bells should start going off. So before you take title to that property, you make sure that the landlord and the tenant sign off. This is the understanding. If they don't, you know what I mean? You can make that a sticking point in your purchase.
So it's way cleaner and better when you have a real estate agent on the seller side and a real estate agent on the buyer side, because both are, we have to follow a code of ethics. So we're making sure that the seller is filling out all the disclosures and talking about things that happen with the place, any issues that they know of, and we're making sure the buyer. So it's super important to have them, but sometimes there's no real estate agents involved. What kind of issues have you run into when it's just like two investors selling to each other?
Unless you have the disclosures we had talked about, a lot of times there is a disconnect. The value of a good real estate agent and the value of a good advocating for one side or the other, I think, is lost. And there's some new ethics opinions that are coming out that are dealing with that and kind of getting to that point, which I think we've all known it's been inherently there. Certainly what's going on with the National Association of Realtors has developed a great deal of press, but there's a reason why these parties have these roles, because they've been through it. You've also helped manage properties and helped find tenants for people in addition to, helping with the purchase and sale agreement. So you understand inherently and practically what happens after there's a transition in the real estate and how to get ahead of that. And, in my experience, where we've certainly been doing purchase and sales, both residential and commercial, for in excess of 25 years now, we see it on the acquisition and the divestiture side, the buying and the selling, and also the management with the tenants. So if you're not ahead of it, you're going to have a problem. And a lot of times when there's investors who aren't paying that close attention, these problems can arise. Some of my investor clients are more sophisticated. If they're buying from other investors, they're well aware of this. They bring in counsel. Sometimes they'll bring in a real estate agent just for the layer of protection, the extra set of eyes. Because the issues, if there's an eviction, there are situations where that process can take a significant amount of time and cost a significant amount of money. So it's short sort of deductible money up front versus potential unknowns and problems down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as an agent, like we go into these places, whether it's the seller side or the buyer side, and we look at everything and we know what to look for and ask the right questions. And We want to make sure everything is disclosed, so there's no issues at the end. And anything that's disclosed to us, like hidden tank underground, if they tell us this, we have to disclose this. So yes, we follow a code of ethics, and we want to make sure everything is done right, everything is honest, and there's no issues.
Yeah. It can't be stated enough how important your role is to the process.
And your role, like, you
Yeah.
know, having a good attorney on our side, like that we work really well with, it's important to have that too.
We have to collaborate because, the fallout is significant. And I think, in any business, real estate as a landlording, it's a job. So you should really understand it. You wouldn't just open up a bakery because you like to make muffins. You would go through the process of going through a business plan and taking a look at what the costs were and where the weaknesses are, maybe take a couple of courses on it in a perfect world. And you can see the difference between people who have really educated themselves. And you and I help educate them all the time. We've done seminars. We've spoken to people individually that have been our clients. We can help them do what they're doing better. They help us do our jobs better because it's a teamwork approach. In my opinion, you shouldn't get into this field unless you have an understanding of the law and an understanding of contracts, understanding what the expectations are, and talking to other people who have been landlords and talking to tenants and seeing what their concerns are in a community. So that way you really get a sense of what's out there and how to address it.
Yeah, going back to the muffin maker, this is what it's like to be a muffin maker. It's the business plan and everything. And they're like, yeah, I want to be a muffin maker. Cool. They make a muffin. They're like, this is amazing. But then they realize, wait, 8 hours I have to stand here and wait for customers to come in, and I have to go like this to the cash register? That's not what I want to do. I want to bake muffins. I don't want to own a business and like do all this. So
Yeah, and
same
there's
thing with
reporting,
landlord.
and certain repairs are able to be depreciated in certain manners, and certain repairs are required to be over a longer period of time. You really should have a qualified CPA helping you with that process. You should have a very good insurance agent that deals with landlord tenancy situations with frequency as part of your team too. And if you've got multiple, it's your point, if you've got like an investor group, they really need to have a good business plan and a buy-sell agreement in place too, because that also has happened over the years where you got two or three folks who buy some multifamilies together and put together an LLC and a muffin shop, and there's no proper operating agreement, and there's no good buy-sell agreement in place, and there's no appropriate insurances, and that also can take a significant amount of time and expense to unbundle. So, again, all stuff that you and I catch in the beginning. How many times have you and I caught two or three folks who have decided, all right, we're going to go in and we're going to take these dollars, we're going to go buy some rental property. Well, we need to create the entity. You should probably all have representation for your own respective interests, unless you want your significant other going into business with your partner. And I don't necessarily think that was perhaps what he or she was thinking at the onset.
And again, like, working really well with a closing attorney, there's so many times where I'm like, George, this is happening. What should we do from our side of the deal? Right. And, so much, it's awesome having that. And good.
And the same thing with Kamil goes the same way. What's going on up there? What's really going on up there? What's really going on? They're saying they're paying the rent on the first of the month. Do I need to know, is there a waiver argument here? Are they really paying whenever they feel like it? How good are the books? Are there any violations for real? And, it's, I forget who said it, but there's a concept of kind of trust but verify. Well, there's that too. Just because a seller is articulating a position, you and I need to objectively check that. Make sure that that's true, because it reverberates and creates issues down the line. And the smoother we can make it for our buyers, the better it is on multiple levels. They might buy other pieces of real estate. They can really help build up that community. We have a lot of housing stock in this state that needs help, and a lot of families in this state that need help. Doing our jobs better helps that community get built better. Kind of a reward that you never saw kind of coming, because the safer you can make the property, better it is for all of us, in the state.
For everybody, yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you very much, George, for having me interview you. And yeah, stop in later in the future. We'll have another session with me to talk about something else besides tenants stabbing each other. So
that's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.